There is something nobody talks about. The version of yourself that only you have ever seen. The one that existed in the quiet moments, when the door was closed and the performance was off, and there was nobody watching, and you finally let yourself feel the full weight of what you were carrying. The grief you never showed anyone. The fear you never admitted to. The nights you sat with a version of yourself that felt completely destroyed and somehow found a way to get up the next morning and walk back into the world and act like none of it had happened. Like you were fine, like you were solid, like the thing that had almost broken you in private had not even touched you in public. This video is about that man, about what that private breaking actually built in him, about why the man who is broken in private is the most unbreakable man in any room he ever walks into, and about why everything you survived when nobody was watching is the very thing that makes you impossible to destroy now. Stay with me. Most men who watch this will never tell anyone what they have actually been through. Not because they are ashamed, but because they learned something early. That the world does not have space for the full truth of what it costs a man to keep going. That most people are not equipped to hold the weight of what you carry. That the version of you that sits alone at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, carrying things that have no name, is not a version you can bring into the daylight without making the people around you uncomfortable. So you learn to split yourself. The private version and the public version. The private version that feels everything. The public version that shows nothing. And most men carry that split for so long that they begin to believe the private version is weakness. That the breaking is something to be hidden. That the nights when everything fell apart were failures to be buried rather than foundations to be built on. But here is what that private breaking was actually doing. Here is what was happening underneath the surface while you were sitting in the dark thinking you were falling apart. You were being built. Not in the way that comfortable men are built. Not through training programs and morning routines and incremental improvement in controlled environments, but in the way that only real suffering can build a man. From the inside. From the place where character actually lives. From the deepest part of a person that only becomes accessible when everything external has been stripped away, and the only thing left is the question of who you are when you have nothing to perform for and nobody to perform to. Marcus Aurelius understood this completely. He was not shaped by his power. He was shaped by what he endured privately before anyone knew his name. The losses nobody recorded. The doubts that never made it into the histories. The version of himself that existed before the empire, before the title, before the world decided who he was supposed to be. He wrote in his private journals nobody was ever meant to read. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He was not writing about strategy. He was writing about something he had experienced personally. The specific discovery that the thing trying to destroy you is simultaneously the thing building you. That the breaking is the building. That the private darkness is the private construction. That the man sitting alone in the rubble of something that just collapsed is not a man who has fallen behind. He is a man who is being forged. Here is the specific thing that private suffering builds that nothing else can. Immunity. Not the performance of immunity, not the appearance of not caring, but the real thing. The version that comes from having already felt the worst and survived it. Most men who have never been through real private suffering operate on a specific kind of fear. The fear of what it would feel like if things fell apart. The fear of the pain they have never experienced. the fear of the unknown darkness they have never sat in. And that fear, even when it is hidden, even when it is managed, even when it is covered by confidence and competence and the performance of a man who has everything under control, is always there, operating underneath every decision, shaping every response, driving a portion of every action. But the man who has already been through the worst, who has already sat in the private darkness and survived it, who has already felt the thing that other men are afraid of feeling, does not operate from that fear, because he already knows the answer to the question everyone else is trying to avoid. He knows what it feels like when everything falls apart. He knows that you survive it. He knows that the morning still comes. He knows that the man on the other side of the worst thing is still standing. And that knowledge, that specific private knowledge that only comes from having actually been through it, is the source of a kind of calm that other men cannot manufacture, cannot fake, cannot access through any shortcut, because it was not given. It was earned, in private, when nobody was watching, when it cost everything to keep going, and you kept going anyway. Epictetus was a slave. He had no freedom, no property, no status, no control over his physical circumstances. Everything that most men define themselves by was taken from him before he ever had the chance to build it. And yet he became the most psychologically free man in the ancient world. Not despite the private suffering, because of it. He said something that most people have read without fully understanding what it means. It's not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters. Most people read that as advice, as a technique, as something to try in difficult situations. But Epictetus was not offering a technique. He was describing something he had discovered through years of private suffering that had no witnesses and no resolution and no comfort. He had discovered that the external world had absolute power over everything he had and zero power over everything he was. That the suffering could take everything outside of him and build everything inside of him simultaneously. That the man who emerges from private breaking with his character intact has something that no circumstance and no person and no amount of loss can ever remove. Because it was not built from the outside. It was built from the inside, by the breaking itself, by the surviving of the breaking, by the getting up every single morning after the breaking and choosing to still be the man he decided to be, even when nobody was watching, even when there was no reward for it, even when everything around him suggested that the choosing was pointless. That choosing, that private choosing, that is where the unbreakable man is built, not in the public victories, in the private decisions to keep going when there was every reason to stop. Here is what I need you to understand about everything you have survived. The version of you that exists right now, the one watching this, the one who has been through things that most people in your life have no idea about, is not the same man who went into those things. He is something different, something that cannot be accurately described to someone who has not experienced it, something that only exists on the other side of real, private suffering. You have been tested in rooms that had no audience. You have been broken in moments that left no record. You have carried weights that nobody offered to help you put down. And you are still here. Not despite all of that, because of all of that. The man who was broken in private is not a man who survived weakness. He is a man who discovered something that comfortable men never find. That the thing inside him that kept choosing to get up, that kept choosing to keep going, that kept choosing to be the man he decided to be, even when the decision cost everything. That thing is not fragile. It never was. It just needed the breaking to become visible. It needed the private darkness to reveal what was always there. And now that you know what is there, now that you have seen what you are made of, in the only conditions that actually test what a man is made of, nothing that comes next can take that knowledge from you. You already know the answer. You have already proven it. In private, where it counts, where it was real. Build from here. See you in the next one.